They fined me for parking in front of my own house. Yes, you heard that right. I wasn't blocking traffic. I wasn't breaking a single state law. I was just tired after a long day and parked my car outside my driveway. The next morning, I found a bright yellow notice from my HOA stuck to my windshield. And that was the moment everything changed. I remember standing there, holding that paper, feeling my heart race with disbelief. How could they do this to me? My own house, my own street, my own car, and yet someone thought they had the right to tell me where I could and couldn't park. It wasn't just a notice. It felt like an attack, a message that said, we control you, and you better follow every tiny rule or else. That's when I saw her. Karen, the self-proclaimed queen of the neighborhood, the woman who lived 3 houses down, always standing with her arms crossed, always watching, always waiting for someone to slip up. She smiled when she saw me pick up that notice, like she had won some invisible game. I knew, right then and there, this wasn't about parking. This was about power. You know what's funny? Most people would have just paid the fine, grumbled a little, and moved on, but not me, because what Karen didn't know, what the HOA didn't know, was that I wasn't just some ordinary neighbor they could push around. I was the DMV commissioner. I wrote the rules. I understood the law better than anyone in that entire neighborhood, and I wasn't about to let them humiliate me on my own doorstep. But here's the truth. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about every single person who ever felt small, who ever felt powerless, who ever felt trapped by ridiculous rules and petty people who thrive on control. And if you've ever had a Karen in your life, then you know exactly how that feels. So let me take you back, because this story isn't just about a parking ticket. It's about a war between someone who thought she owned the neighborhood, and me, a man who'd been underestimated for far too long. The first shot fired was that fine, but I wasn't going to let it be the last. I walked into my house that day, holding the notice like it was evidence in a courtroom. My wife saw my face and immediately knew something was wrong. "What happened?" she asked, her voice soft but worried. I handed her the paper. She read it, then shook her head. "This is ridiculous. You didn't do anything wrong." And she was right. But it wasn't about right or wrong to people like Karen. It was about control. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about every single person who lived under the thumb of the HOA. People too tired to fight. People who didn't know their rights. People who thought they had no choice but to obey. I thought about the elderly couple down the street who once got fined for having a bird feeder in their yard. I thought about the single mom who cried when they forced her to repaint her door because the shade of blue wasn't approved. And I thought about Karen, laughing in her kitchen, satisfied that she had ruined my day. And that's when I made my decision. I wasn't just going to fight this fine. I was going to fight the entire system. The next morning, I showed up at the HOA office. You should have seen their faces when I walked in. Calm, confident, not angry, not shouting, but ready. I laid that fine notice on the desk and asked one simple question. Can you show me the legal statute that gives you the authority to override state parking law? The room went silent. Papers shuffled. Eyes darted. And in that silence, I realized something powerful. They didn't have one. You see, most HOAs operate on fear. They throw around rules. They send threatening letters. They fine you. And most people just pay because they're scared. But fear only works until someone decides not to be afraid. And I was done being afraid. Karen wasn't happy. Oh no, she wasn't. She showed up at my door later that evening, furious. She told me I was setting a bad example for neighborhood. She told me rules were rules, and everyone had to follow them. And then she said the words that lit a fire inside me. If you don't like it, maybe you shouldn't live here. Do you know what it feels like to be told you don't belong in your own home? Do you know what it feels like to be pushed, to be cornered, to be treated like you're less than? I stood there, looking her in the eyes, and I realized this wasn't just Karen talking. This was every bully I had ever met in my life. Every person who thought power gave them the right to crush others. And I wasn't going to take it anymore. So I smiled. I thanked her for her concern. And the very next day, I began my plan. I went through every single HOA bylaw, every outdated rule, every contradiction, every loophole. I studied it like a case file, and the more I read, the more I realized how broken their system was. They had rules that directly violated state law. They had procedures that weren't legally enforceable, and they had been getting away with it for years because no one had ever dared to challenge them. But I was going to challenge them. The funny thing about power is this: once you expose it for what it really is, it starts to crumble. And Karen's power was about to collapse. But let me pause here, because I want you to imagine something. Imagine standing up to the person who always tries to control you. Imagine looking them in the eye and saying, "No more." Imagine the freedom, the strength, the pride that comes with taking back what's yours. That's what I was feeling. And that's what I want for you, too. This was no longer about a fine. This was about justice. And justice was coming. So, when the HOA called their next meeting, I was ready. Oh, I was more than ready. And what happened in that room? That's where everything exploded. The night of the HOA meeting arrived, and I could feel the tension in the air. Neighbors were whispering to each other as they walked into the room, carrying years of frustration on their shoulders. Some looked tired, some looked defeated, and some looked curious about why I had that confident smile on my face. They didn't know it yet, but tonight everything was going to change. Karen sat at the front, her posture stiff, her lips curled into that smug little smile she wore like armor. She thought this was her domain. She thought this meeting was another chance to remind everyone that she ran the neighborhood. But what she didn't know was that her empire was built on sand, and I was about to wash it all away. The president of the HOA cleared his throat and began the meeting, reading through the agenda like nothing unusual was about to happen. First order of business, he said, parking violations. My fine was the first on the list, and that's when I stood up. I didn't shout. I didn't lose control. I spoke clearly, calmly, and with conviction. Before we discussed my so-called violation, I began, I'd like to ask a question. Can anyone here point to the state law that gives this HOA the right to issue fines for parking on a public street? The room went silent. Karen leaned forward, her face tightening. This isn't about state law, she snapped. This is about community rules, and you agreed to them when you moved here. I smiled. Actually, it is about state law, because no HOA rule can override it. And according to state law, parking on a public street is perfectly legal, as long as you're not blocking driveways, fire hydrants, or emergency access. I wasn't doing any of those things, which means this fine is invalid. Murmurs spread through the room. Neighbors turned to one another, their eyes widening. Some even nodded slowly, like they were hearing the truth for the first time. Karen's face turned red. That's not the point, she barked. The point is, rules are rules, and we expect everyone to follow them. If you can't, then maybe you don't belong here. There was again those words, that arrogance, that belief that control equals authority. But this time, I didn't let them sting. I turned to the room and asked, how many of you have been fined for something that didn't make sense? How many of you felt powerless to fight back? Hands started to rise. One by one, people lifted their arms. The elderly couple with the bird feeder, the single mom with the painted door, the father who once got fined for leaving his trash cans out an hour too long. Their voices joined mine, and suddenly it wasn't just me against Karen. It was all of us. I continued. These fines, these rules, they're not about community. They're about control. And control only works if we let it. But here's the truth. This HOA has been operating beyond its authority for years. And tonight, that ends. Karen tried to cut me off, but the momentum had already shifted. Neighbors were speaking up, telling their stories, demanding answers. The room that once echoed with silence was now alive with voices that had been quiet for too long. And then I dropped the final blow. I am the DMV commissioner, I said firmly, and I know the law inside and out. And I can promise you, not one of these parking fines is legally enforceable, which means if any of you have ever paid one, you have the right to demand that money back. The room erupted. Gasps, whispers, even applause. For the first time, people weren't looking at Karen with fear. They were looking at her with defiance. Karen slammed her fist on the table. "You can't do this," she shouted. But it was too late. The walls of her power had already crumbled. The HOA president stammered, flipping through papers, trying to find something, anything, to defend their position. But there was nothing. No law, no authority, nothing but the empty threats they had been using for years. Neighbors began standing, one after another, declaring they wouldn't pay another fine. They demanded transparency. They demanded fairness. They demanded change. And in that moment, Karen's grip on the neighborhood slipped right through her fingers. I looked at her one last time. She was pale now, her eyes darting around, searching for support, but finding none. The queen had lost her crown. And me? I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not just victory, but peace. Because this wasn't just about winning an argument. It was about freeing people. It was about showing them they had power all along. They just needed someone to remind them. As the meeting ended, people came up to me, shaking my hand, thanking me. Some even hugged me, tears in their eyes. "You stood up for us," they said. And I realized sometimes one act of courage can unlock courage in others. Sometimes one voice can spark a chorus. Karen stormed out, slamming the door behind her, but her power was gone. She was just another neighbor now, no longer feared, no longer obeyed. And me? I walked home under the night sky, feeling lighter than I had in years, because justice had been served. But here's what I want you to take away from my story. You don't need to be a DMV commissioner to stand up for yourself. You don't need a title or power or authority. All you need is the courage to say, enough is enough. So, if you ever felt trapped, if you've ever felt small, if you've ever felt like someone was holding power over you, remember this. Rules are only as strong as the people who believe in them. And when you stop believing, when you decide to stand tall, no care in the world can control you. Backhand index pointing right if the story inspired you. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And remember, never let fear silence your voice. Stand up, speak out, and take your power back.